Before you count sheep, count mysteries.
On March 8, 2014, Flight MH370 was supposed to be just another routine journey, a scheduled overnight flight from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, to Beijing, China. Nothing about that evening suggested it would become one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. At Kuala Lumpur International Airport, passengers checked in, said goodbye to loved ones, and boarded the aircraft. Business travelers prepared for meetings. Families look forward to vacations. Some passengers simply hope to get a few hours of sleep before arriving in Beijing the following morning. None of them knew they were boarding a flight that would never reach its destination. The aircraft assigned to the route was a Boeing 777-200ER. At the time, the Boeing 777 had one of the strongest safety records in commercial aviation. Millions of passengers had flown safely aboard the aircraft. It was considered reliable, technologically advanced, and capable of flying some of the longest routes in the world. There was nothing unusual about the airplane itself. It had completed thousands of successful flights before that night. On board were 239 people. That included 227 passengers and 12 crew members. They came from more than a dozen different countries. Most were Chinese nationals, but the flight also carried passengers from Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia, India, France, the United States, and several other nations. Every person on board had their own story. Some were returning home. Others were beginning new journeys. Some had no idea that their families would spend years searching for answers. In the cockpit sat Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a highly experienced pilot with more than 18,000 hours of flying experience. He had spent decades flying for Malaysia Airlines and was widely regarded as skilled and professional. Beside him was First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid. At just 27 years old, he was still building his career but had already accumulated thousands of flight hours. For both pilots, this should have been another ordinary overnight flight. Weather conditions along the planned route were generally favorable. There were no reports of severe turbulence, no dangerous storms, and no indication that the flight faced any unusual challenges before departure. At 12:41 a.m. local time, Flight MH370 pushed back from the gate. Moments later, the aircraft accelerated down the runway. Seconds after takeoff, the Boeing 777 lifted smoothly into the night sky. Air traffic controllers watched as the aircraft climbed toward its assigned cruising altitude. Everything appeared completely normal. The crew communicated with air traffic control exactly as expected. The aircraft systems reported no problems. Every indication suggested the flight would arrive in Beijing a little over 5 hours later, right on schedule. But appearances can be deceiving, because less than an hour after takeoff, something happened. Something that would trigger the largest search operation in aviation history. A Boeing 777 carrying 239 people simply disappeared. At first, Flight MH370 appeared to be following its planned route perfectly. The Boeing 777 continued climbing to its cruising altitude, while air traffic controllers monitored the aircraft from the ground. Everything looked routine. The crew communicated normally. The aircraft responded exactly as expected. There were no reports of technical problems, no emergency calls, no signs of panic. To everyone watching from the ground, MH MH370 was simply another aircraft crossing Southeast Asia. As the flight approached the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace, the crew prepared for a routine handoff to the next air traffic control sector. This happens thousands of times every day. Pilots acknowledge the instruction, thank the current controller, and establish contact with the next one. At 1:19 a.m. local time, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah made what would become one of the most famous radio transmissions in aviation history. Good night, Malaysian 370. The message sounded completely normal, calm, professional. Nothing in the pilot's voice suggested that anything was wrong. It was expected that, within moments, the crew would contact Vietnamese air traffic control, but that call never came. Instead, the aircraft simply fell silent. Less than 2 minutes later, at approximately 1:21 a.m., MH370's transponder stopped transmitting. The transponder is a critical system. It continuously broadcasts an aircraft's identity, altitude, speed, and position to civilian air traffic controllers. Without it, the aircraft effectively disappears from civilian radar screens. Controllers immediately noticed something unusual. They attempted to contact the crew. There was no response. Vietnamese controllers also tried calling the aircraft. Silence? At first, nobody assumed the worst. Communication issues occasionally happen. Radios can malfunction. Frequencies can be entered incorrectly. Pilots sometimes become temporarily busy inside the cockpit. But as the minutes passed, concern began to grow. Unknown to civilian controllers, military radar was still tracking an unidentified aircraft. According to Malaysian military radar data, shortly after its transponder disappeared, MH370 made an unexpected turn. Instead of continuing northeast toward Beijing, the aircraft turned sharply to the west. It crossed back over the Malay Peninsula and headed toward the Andaman Sea. This was no minor deviation. It was a dramatic change in course, one that had never been requested and one that has never been fully explained. Investigators would later spend years trying to answer a simple question. Why? Why would a modern passenger aircraft suddenly leave its planned route without declaring an emergency, without contacting air traffic control, and without any indication that something was wrong? Even more puzzling, the aircraft appeared to continue flying for hours after disappearing from civilian radar. But how was that possible if nobody could see it? The answer would come from space, not from radar, but from a series of automated satellite signals. Signals that would become the most important clues in one of the greatest aviation mysteries ever recorded. By sunrise, Flight MH370 should have been preparing to land in Beijing. Instead, it was nowhere to be found. Air traffic controllers had lost contact. Civilian radar no longer showed the aircraft, and no distress signal had ever been received. At first, authorities believed the aircraft might have suffered a communications failure. Perhaps the crew had experienced an electrical problem. Perhaps they had diverted to another airport. But as the hours passed, those possibilities became less and less likely. Airlines attempted to contact the crew. Air traffic controllers continued calling the aircraft. Emergency frequencies were monitored. There was only silence. Then, investigators discovered something extraordinary. Although MH370 had disappeared from civilian radar, it had not completely vanished. High above Earth, a communications satellite operated by the British company Inmarsat had been quietly exchanging automated signals with the aircraft. These signals weren't phone calls. They weren't text messages. And they contained no information about the aircraft's exact location. They were simply routine electronic handshakes. Every hour, the aircraft's satellite communication system automatically responded to a signal from the satellite, almost like saying, "I'm still here." Investigators quickly realized these handshakes could answer one crucial question: not where the aircraft was, but whether it was still flying. The answer shocked everyone. MH370. O hadn't disappeared immediately after losing contact. According to the satellite data, it continued flying for approximately 7 more hours. That single discovery changed the entire investigation. If the aircraft had remained airborne for hours, it could no longer be anywhere near the South China Sea, where search teams had initially been deployed. Engineers from Inmarsat worked alongside investigators to analyze the signals. By measuring tiny changes in timing and the Doppler shift of the radio waves, they calculated 2 enormous arcs across the Earth's surface. One stretched north across Central Asia. The other curved deep into the southern Indian Ocean. Investigators compared both possibilities with military radar data, fuel calculations, aircraft performance, and every other piece of available evidence. Gradually, one conclusion began to emerge. The northern route appeared increasingly unlikely. The southern arc, leading into one of the most remote regions of the Indian Ocean, became the primary focus. It was a devastating realization. If MH370 had ended its flight there, it would be resting beneath thousands of meters of water in one of the least explored parts of the planet, a place with towering underwater mountains, deep trenches, and weather conditions capable of stopping even the most advanced search vessels. The challenge facing investigators was almost unimaginable. They knew the aircraft had probably flown for hours. They had a vast arc stretching thousands of kilometers, but they still had no exact location. Searching that area would be like looking for a single piece of metal somewhere inside an ocean. Yet despite the impossible odds, the search was only beginning. Nations from around the world joined the effort, launching what would become the largest and most expensive search operation in aviation history. By the time investigators concluded that flight MH370 had likely ended somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, they faced a challenge unlike anything aviation had ever seen. They didn't know exactly where the aircraft had gone. They didn't know when it had crashed. They didn't even know why it had left its planned route. All they had was a vast stretch of open ocean, thousands of kilometers wide, one of the most remote places on Earth. It was an area few ships ever crossed, an ocean known for towering waves, powerful currents, and depths reaching more than 6,000 meters. Finding an aircraft there seemed almost impossible. Yet despite those odds, the search began. Within days, dozens of countries offered assistance. Ships, aircraft, satellites, and military resources were deployed. Australia, Malaysia, China, the United States, and many other nations joined what would become the largest search operation in aviation history. Day after day, search aircraft flew long missions over the Indian Ocean. Their crews scanned endless waves, looking for anything unusual. A floating suitcase, a life jacket, a seat cushion, even the smallest piece of debris could reveal where MH370 had gone down. Naval vessels searched below the surface. Sophisticated sonar equipment mapped the ocean floor. Autonomous underwater vehicles, machines capable of diving thousands of meters beneath the surface, explored places no human had ever seen. The operation was unlike anything attempted before. Every square kilometer had to be searched methodically. Every sonar image had to be reviewed. Every strange object resting on the seabed had to be investigated. But the ocean refused to give up its secrets. Weeks became months. Months became years. Search crews battled violent storm, enormous waves, and unpredictable weather. Sometimes ships were forced to suspend operations for days. Other times, sonar equipment detected mysterious shapes on the ocean floor, only for investigators to discover they were natural rock formations. Time after time, hope turned into disappointment. Families watched every press conference. Every announcement brought hope, followed by heartbreak. The emotional toll became overwhelming. Parents waited for answers. Husbands and wives continued hoping for news. Children grew older, without knowing what had happened to their loved ones. Meanwhile, investigators continued refining their calculations. New satellite analysis, improved drift modeling, and ocean current simulations helped narrow the search area. But even the revised search zone covered tens of thousands of square kilometers. It was the equivalent of searching for a single airplane beneath one of the deepest and most hostile oceans on Earth. Yet by 2017, after searching more than 120,000 square kilometers of the seabed, authorities made an announcement many had feared. The official underwater search was suspended despite years of work, enormous international cooperation, and hundreds of millions of dollars spent. Flight MH370 had still not been found. It was an outcome almost nobody had imagined. In the age of satellites, GPS, and modern aviation, how could a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people simply disappear? Yet the mystery wasn't over. Because while the aircraft itself remained missing, the ocean was about to reveal its first clues. Small pieces of debris, carried thousands of kilometers by powerful currents, would begin washing ashore. And those discoveries would confirm one heartbreaking truth. Flight MH370 had ended in the Indian Ocean. More than a year had passed, and still, there was no sign of Flight MH370. No wreckage, no black boxes, no answers. Many people had begun to wonder if the aircraft would ever be found. Then, on July 29th, 2015, a discovery on a small island in the Indian Ocean changed everything. On the French island of Réunion, located more than 4,000 kilometers from the suspected crash site, a beach cleaning crew noticed a large piece of aircraft debris washed ashore. At first glance, it looked like little more than a damaged section of metal, sun-bleached, covered in marine life. Clearly, it had spent months drifting across the ocean. Authorities quickly secured the object. Aviation experts were called in. The fragment was transported to France for examination. Their investigators made a remarkable discovery. The object was identified as a flaperon, a movable section attached to the trailing edge of an aircraft's wing. It plays a critical role during takeoff and landing, helping generate additional lift. Even more importantly, every aircraft component carries unique manufacturing markings. Investigators carefully examined serial numbers, maintenance records, and production data. After extensive analysis, officials confirmed that the flaperon belonged to Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. It was the first physical evidence proving that the aircraft had crashed into the Indian Ocean. For the families, the confirmation was devastating. More than 16 months after the disappearance, hope that the aircraft had landed safely somewhere was effectively gone. But investigators still faced an enormous problem. A single piece of debris could not reveal where the aircraft entered the water. Ocean currents are incredibly powerful. Over months, floating debris can travel thousands of kilometers. Scientists began studying winds, currents, seasonal weather patterns, and computer simulations. Their goal was simple: determine where the debris had started its journey. In the months and years that followed, additional fragments believed to be from MH370 were discovered. Pieces washed ashore in Mozambique, South Africa, Tanzania, Mauritius, and even Madagascar. Some of these fragments were officially confirmed as coming from MH370. Others were classified as highly likely, while a number could never be conclusively linked to the aircraft. Each new discovery gave investigators another piece of the puzzle, yet none of them answered the question everyone was asking: where was the rest of the aircraft? The flight data recorder, commonly known as the black box, had never been recovered. Neither had the cockpit voice recorder. Without them, investigators had no direct evidence explaining what happened during the aircraft's final hours. There were no recordings of conversations inside the cockpit, no final warning messages, no system failures captured in the aircraft's data. The most important witnesses remained somewhere beneath the Indian Ocean, and with each passing year, locating them became even more difficult. Despite years of searching, the main wreckage of MH370 has never been found. That absence has fueled countless theories, documentaries, books, and debates around the world. Because without the aircraft, there's no definitive explanation, only evidence, calculations, and possibilities. More than a decade after flight MH370 disappeared, one question continues to haunt investigators: what really happened during those final 7 hours? More than a decade has passed since flight MH370 disappeared. Millions of dollars have been spent. Hundreds of experts have analyzed the evidence. Yet one question remains unanswered. What happened to flight MH370 without the main wreckage, without the flight data recorder, and without the cockpit voice recorder? Investigators cannot say with absolute certainty. Instead, several theories have emerged. Some are supported by evidence, others rely on speculation. Let's examine the most widely discussed possibilities. Theory 1. Pilot suicide. Perhaps the most controversial theory is that the aircraft was deliberately diverted by someone inside the cockpit. Investigators know that MH370 made an unexpected turn shortly after losing contact with air traffic control. The aircraft's transponder stopped transmitting. It then flew for several more hours, following a route that appeared deliberate rather than random. Because of those actions, some investigators believe human intervention is the most likely explanation. Attention naturally focused on Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah. He was an experienced pilot with over 18,000 flight hours. Authorities thoroughly investigated his personal life, finances, health, and relationships. They also examined a flight simulator found in his home. Some recovered simulator data showed routes extending into the southern Indian Ocean, leading some experts to suggest it might be significant. Others argue there is no evidence proving those simulator routes were connected to MH370. The official investigation found no conclusive evidence that the captain intended to crash the aircraft. To this day, no definitive proof supports or disproves this theory. Theory 2, hijacking. Another possibility is that someone else on board took control of the aircraft. There were 239 people aboard MH370. Could one or more passengers have hijacked the flight? Investigators examined passenger backgrounds, travel histories, and security footage from Kuala Lumpur International Airport. 2 passengers had boarded using stolen passports. Initially, this raised fears of terrorism. However, investigators later concluded they were Iranian migrants attempting to reach Europe, and found no evidence linking them to terrorism or the disappearance. No group has ever claimed responsibility. No credible evidence has emerged suggesting a hijacking took place. Theory 3, mechanical failure. Could a catastrophic technical failure explain what happened? Modern aircraft are incredibly complex. An electrical fire, decompression, or another serious malfunction could potentially disable communications. Some aviation experts have suggested that a fire in the electronics bay might explain the loss of contact. Others have proposed rapid cabin depressurization. In that scenario, both pilots and passengers could have lost consciousness due to a lack of oxygen. The aircraft operating on autopilot would have continued flying until it exhausted its fuel. This theory could explain why no distress call was ever made. However, investigators have found no direct evidence confirming such a failure occurred. Theory 4, hypoxia. One theory closely related to mechanical failure involves hypoxia. Hypoxia occurs when the brain receives insufficient oxygen. It can impair judgment, slow reaction times, and eventually cause unconsciousness. If cabin pressure had been lost, everyone on board could have become incapacitated within minutes. The aircraft, left on autopilot, may have continued flying until fuel exhaustion. Several aviation accidents in the past have followed a similar pattern, but once again, there is no direct evidence proving this happened aboard MH370. Conspiracy theories. Over the years, countless conspiracy theories have appeared online. Some claim the aircraft was secretly landed. Others suggest military involvement, hidden technology, or government cover-ups. While these stories attract attention, investigators have found no credible evidence supporting them. Most aviation experts consider these theories highly unlikely. Conclusion. The truth is, every theory has strengths, and every theory has weaknesses. Some explain the aircraft's unusual route, but not the missing communications. Others explain the silence, but not the deliberate course changes. Without recovering the main wreckage, the flight recorders, and the cockpit voice recorder, investigators may never know exactly what happened inside Flight MH370 during its final hours. It is a mystery unlike any other. A modern Boeing 777 carrying 239 people vanished from the skies, and despite years of searching, the complete story remains unknown. More than a decade has passed, yet Flight MH370 remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in aviation history. Despite the largest search effort ever conducted, despite millions of dollars spent, Despite years of investigation, the aircraft has never been fully recovered. For the families of the 239 people on board, the passage of time has not brought closure. Every anniversary, every news report, and every new search announcement reopens old wounds. They are still waiting for answers. For many of them, the most painful part isn't knowing that their loved ones are gone. It's not knowing exactly how or why it happened. Aviation experts agree on one thing. The flight almost certainly ended somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, but until the main wreckage, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder are recovered. The final moments of MH370 may never be fully understood. In recent years, several companies have expressed interest in launching new search missions. Advances in sonar technology, underwater mapping, and autonomous underwater vehicles have made it possible to explore areas that were once considered unreachable. Some experts believe the aircraft could still be found. Others fear that after so many years, the ocean may never give up all of its secrets. Yet history has shown that impossible discoveries can still happen. Shipwrecks lost for centuries have been found. Submarines once thought impossible to locate have been recovered. Entire aircraft have been discovered decades after disappearing. Perhaps one day, MH370 will join that list. Perhaps somewhere, beneath thousands of meters of water, the answers have been waiting all along. Until that day, investigators can only rely on satellite data, recovered debris, scientific analysis, and the evidence already collected. The rest remains hidden beneath the Indian Ocean. Flight MH370 changed aviation forever. It exposed weaknesses in global aircraft tracking. It led to new discussions about real-time flight monitoring, satellite communications, and emergency tracking systems. Even today, airlines and aviation authorities continue working to ensure that a disappearance like MH370 can never happen again. But despite those changes, one question still echoes around the world. What really happened to Flight MH370? Maybe, one day, a new expedition will locate the wreckage. Maybe the black boxes will finally be recovered. Maybe investigators will hear the voices from the cockpit and finally understand what happened during those final hours. Or perhaps the complete truth will remain forever hidden beneath the ocean. Until then, Flight MH370 remains more than just a missing airplane. It is a reminder that even in an age of satellites, GPS, and modern technology, our world can still hold mysteries. Mysteries that continue to challenge science, investigators, and all of us. Maybe one day, someone will finally solve this mystery. But until then, don't count sheep. Count mysteries.